She hurled the kettle like it was holy water and the HOA bylaws were scripture, sending a scalding arc straight onto my wife's medical fogger. The plastic device detonated with a hiss that sounded exactly like every neighbor who'd stayed silent for years. Lila screamed, her forearm already blistering under the sudden thermal shock, and the perfect Serenity Oaks morning turned into a crime scene faster than you could say, aesthetic harmony violation. I didn't yell. I didn't lunge. I just pulled out my phone, snapped 3 angles, time-stamped them, and smiled the kind of smile that only a county forensic property investigator can give when the perp hands you the entire case on a silver platter. Because Patricia Pat Winslow, acting president, clipboard saint, and self-appointed guardian of curb appeal, had no idea the man she'd spent 2 years slandering as that agitator was about to turn her little power trip into a federal-level takedown. We'd moved to Willowbrook Estates for one reason only: Lila's lungs. 8 months of hospital beds and oxygen tanks after a brutal flare-up left her needing clean air, low pollen, and the gentle therapeutic mist from that small whisper-quiet fogger the manufacturer literally called breath ease. Every morning she'd wheel out to the patio, tuck one foot under her, balance her sketchpad, and let the soft vapor curl around her lavender and herbs like a protective blanket. It wasn't decoration. It was survival. It was the only thing that let her paint again after the doctor said she might never hold a brush steady. Pat hated it on sight. First citation: visual disunity. Second, non-approved airflow apparatus. Third, potential airborne pollutant creating community anxiety. Each notice more unhinged than the last, delivered with that fake sweet smile and the laminated badge glinting like a sheriff's star bought on Etsy. That morning Lila had finally smiled, really smiled, clipping her first lavender sprig of the season while the fogger hummed happily. Then Pat marched up the walkway like she was storming Normandy, kettle swinging in her right hand. "We need to demonstrate risk to establish compliance, Mr. Caldwell," she announced in that practice board meeting tone, all concern and zero humanity. Before I could even ask what the hell demonstrate meant, she tipped the kettle. Boiling water hit the fogger dead center. Plastic cracked. Vapor turned to steam explosion. Lila's scream cut through the neighborhood like a siren nobody wanted to hear. The wheelchair jolted. "One will lift it." Her shawl slipped and I saw the skin on her forearm already lifting in angry red sheets. Pat stood 5 feet away, kettle still dripping, badge shining, looking for all the world like she just performed a public service. I lunged for Lila, but my brain, the same brain that had testified in 3 separate cases that sent crooked developers to prison, was already cataloging everything: entry arc, splash radius, nozzle deformation, exact temperature differential. Because I knew this device inside out. 2 years ago I'd consulted on its thermal safety thresholds for the manufacturer. Pat had just gift-wrapped her own destruction. While Lila gasped in pain, I snapped more photos, close-ups of the ruptured casing, the burn pattern matching the kettle spout, the timestamp on my phone proving the exact second. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Dogs barked. Nobody moved. Typical Willowbrook. Perfectly manicured lawns, perfectly terrified residents. Pat already had her phone out. "Yes, there's been a safety breach involving an unauthorized device. Explosive result. I'll need a forensic assessment." She hung up, looked straight at me, and said with the sincerity of a used car salesman, "It's not personal, Ethan. It's procedural." I almost laughed. Not personal. She'd spent months calling me the troublemaker who questions everything in every group chat, turning half the street against us before we even unpacked. Now she'd boiled my wife's lifeline and expected me to nod along. I helped Lila inside, bandaged what I could with the kit we kept for her condition, and drove her to urgent care in silence. "Second-degree burns," the doctor said. Lucky it wasn't her chest. Lucky. The word tasted like battery acid. When we got home 3 hours later, a fresh yellow citation flapped on the door. Pending violation review. Fire risk and non-compliant equipment use. Section 12D. No signature. Just blue painter's tape like they were gift-wrapping their own guilt. Inside the house felt heavier, quieter. Lila stared at her bandaged arm, fingers twitching like she wanted to sketch but couldn't bear the reminder. I walked back out to the patio where the shattered fogger lay in pieces. The mist was gone. The peace was gone. But the evidence wasn't. That's when I saw Harlan Reeves, one of the quieter board members, standing at the end of the driveway holding a manila envelope like it was radioactive. He wouldn't come closer. "This is standard procedure," he muttered, eyes darting toward Pat's beige SUV still parked 2 houses down. "I didn't vote for any of it." He handed me the envelope and left without another word. Inside, 2 pages of procedural nonsense and a timestamp that made my blood run cold. Pat had filed her incident report with code enforcement at 9:12 a.m. She'd thrown the water at 9:18. 6 minutes early. Premeditated. Not a heat-of-the-moment tantrum. A calculated performance designed to create the exact precedent she needed to ram through new fines and more control. I stood there under the pergola, envelope in hand, and felt the shift. For 2 years I'd been the guy they whispered about, the forensic nerd who once dared question why every mailbox had to be the exact shade of Willowbrook beige. They'd slandered me in newsletters, frozen me out of block parties, made Lila cry more than once. I'd stayed silent. I documented. And now Pat had handed me the smoking kettle. I folded the papers, placed them beside the broken ceramic planter, and whispered to the empty patio, "Game on, Regina. You wanted a demonstration? Let's give the whole neighborhood one they'll never forget." The next morning I found Harlan under the community walking trail pergola, staring at the trees like they might rat him out. Same collared shirt, same nervous clipboard. "They're issuing more citations," he said before I even spoke. 2 more foggers, 1 terrarium mister, 1 guy CPAP humidifier. Pat's calling them aesthetic pollutants. Section 9 stretch so far it's basically a rubber band. He grimaced. "She's improvising faster than the board can keep up. Says if something emits mist it creates discomfort. Most folks are too scared to fight back because their fence paint is next." There it was, the crack in the armor. Harlan wasn't brave, but he was tired. Tired of the fear, tired of the silence. I didn't push. I just asked for timelines, processes, anything he could give without signing his own citation. He slipped me a folded page. Last week's unuploaded meeting minutes. Exploratory discussion of public safety demonstration and formal support, if scope remains invisible and reversible. Invisible. Reversible. Like boiling water on a disabled woman's arm was just a minor editing note. Back home I opened my work laptop, the same one I used to reconstruct arson patterns that sent CEOs to prison, and logged into the county environmental hazard portal using my credentials. Case ID already sitting there, flagged through the HOA liaison channel. I clicked claim. Within seconds it was mine. Conflict of interest protocol initiated. Mandatory peer review routed to my colleague Dr. Marcus Trent, the one-man Pat couldn't bully. By afternoon we were in the satellite lab surrounded by the fogger's remains. Cracked casing, warped coil, blister patterns that screamed external thermal assault. Trent leaned over the infrared overlay. Bullseye fracture from a single overhead pour. 200+ degrees. No internal pressure buildup. This wasn't a malfunction, Ethan. This was an execution. I smiled for the first time since the scream. Exactly. And the executioner filed her alibi 6 minutes early. We documented everything, microscopic swabs, fracture mapping, residue that would match the minerals in Pat's kettle water. I added the time-stamped photos, Harlan's voice memo he'd risked sending, the unredacted minutes. Then I did the one thing Pat never expected. I filed a preemptive copy with the HOA's liability insurer, using the obscure clause they'd added last year about municipal forensic claims triggering automatic review. Maya Lindale from East Point Mutual emailed back in under 2 hours. Internal review initiated. Stand by. The machine was moving. And Pat, still posting her emergency aesthetic fog emissions ban across the community portal, had no clue the guillotine was already falling. She escalated like a cornered animal. By evening metal stakes appeared along our sidewalk, bright red signs screaming unapproved equipment zone, safety review pending. 9 houses by nightfall. Volunteers she'd handpicked drilled them in while residents pretended not to notice. I photographed every single one, sent the batch to the insurer with a note about unilateral executive action violating their own charter. Pat thought optics would save her. She didn't understand that in my world optics were just another data point, and every data point now pointed straight at her. Lila watched me from the sunroom, new fogger still in its box, sketchpad untouched. "You're really doing this," she said quietly. I kissed the top of her head. "I've been doing this since the first citation, love. I just waited for her to boil over." She touched her bandage and smiled, small but real. "Make it hurt, Ethan. Not for me. For every person who's ever been afraid to breathe in their own yard." The sign stayed up one more night. Then the emails started. The insurer wanted a meeting. The board wanted an emergency session. And Pat, clipboard clutched like a shield, was about to learn what happens when the man you slandered for 2 years finally opens the file he's been keeping since day one. By Monday, the HOA portal lit up with Pat's latest masterpiece, Emergency Safety Standards Adjustment, Aesthetic Fog Emissions Ban. For paragraphs of bureaucratic word salad claiming my wife's fogger was now a Category 1 mechanical failure that justified immediate prohibition on any visible vapor device. No mention of the burns. No mention of Lila. Just Community Reassurance Initiative, and a vague promise of pending forensic evaluation. She was trying to poison the narrative before my report even hit the board. Cute. I closed the tab and opened the insurance policy instead. Section 4D was crystal clear. Any emergency policy change required certified causality evidence within 7 business days, or the change was suspended. Clock started the second she posted. She'd just given me a deadline and a bullseye. At 9 a.m. sharp, I uploaded the full reconstruction packet, Trent's cosine lab findings, infrared overlays showing the exact 40-degree pour angle, residue swabs matching the kettle water, the pre-incident timestamp proving premeditation, Harlan's unredacted meeting minutes, and a freeze frame of Pat standing over the wreckage still holding the kettle like a trophy. I sent one copy to the City Code Enforcement Oversight Archive, and another to Maya Lindale with a single-line cover. Please note visual demonstrations do not qualify as spontaneous accidents under Clause 4 liability thresholds. 2 hours later, her reply. Reviewed and escalated. Stand by for next procedural phase. Cold, professional, and terrifying if you were the one who just boiled a resident. The signs started coming down by afternoon. One by one, residents pulled them out of their lawns like they were removing landmines. Someone even sharpened a question mark across the one in front of the Johnson's place. Pat's volunteers showed up to reinstall but left after 10 minutes of icy stares. The tide was turning and she felt it. At 5:41 p.m. I heard the drill again, but this time it was someone taking their own sign down. By nightfall, only 3 remained. I photographed the sequence and sent it straight to the insurer. Another crack in the armor. Harlan knocked the next morning looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. "She's calling an emergency vote to ratify the signs and the ban," he said, handing me another envelope. Inside was Pat's internal email to the board. Strategically necessary demonstration, controlled visual impact, unified policy must appear first. The phrasing was damning. She'd basically admitted the whole thing was staged. Harlan ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not brave, Ethan. But I'm not letting her burn another person for curb appeal." He left the flash drive with the original metadata intact file. Timestamp proved it was written the day before the attack. Intent frozen in digital amber. I laid everything out on the dining table like a crime scene reconstruction, which it was. Forensic stills on the left. Trent's findings in the center. Pat's pre-filed report and the unredacted memo on the right. The internal email crowned it all. I built the presentation slide by slide. No emotion, just facts. Sequence. Timing. Material evidence. Procedural violations. By noon it was airtight. I uploaded the full packet, attached the insurer's acknowledgement, and waited for the explosion. It came at 3 p.m. in the form of a thick envelope shoved under our door. No knock, no return address. Formal response to preliminary allegation of liability. 23 pages of gaslighting. Pat claimed the water was lukewarm, the fogger had a known defect, and no injury was verified at time of response. She never said Lila's name. She stripped the humanity out of it like it was just another citation. I folded the packet once, slid it into the folder with everything else, and smiled at the clasp as it snapped shut. Tomorrow I'd walk into that board meeting and place truth beside fiction. One would hold. One would crumble. Lila sat on the edge of the bed while I helped her with burn cream. "They're really going to let her get away with it?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. No. And neither am I. She didn't need the details. She just needed to know the man who'd been slandered for years was finally speaking, with evidence that couldn't be ignored. The community center smelled like stale coffee and fear. Fluorescent lights buzzed. Chairs arranged in a half circle for maximum performative transparency. Pat was already there in her navy blazer, hair in a bun so tight it looked painful, smiling that calculated smile. "Ethan," she greeted like we were old friends. I didn't answer. I took the seat directly opposite and placed my briefcase down with a soft click that echoed louder than any gavel. Board members filed in. Harlan last. One small nod enough. At 6:01 the administrator called order and introduced the main event. Alleged procedural misconduct and community endangerment during enforcement demonstration. Pat rose first, of course. Delivered her speech like a press release. Necessary engagement. Preventative compliance. Community reassurance initiative. Not one mention of burns. Not one admission. When she finished she sat with folded hands, spine straight, convinced she'd won. I stood. No mic. No raised voice. I simply handed out printed copies of the forensics report to every board member, and laid the final copy in front of Pat. Title page. External thermal-induced casing rupture. Non-mechanical origin. The room went still. The explosion was not internal, I said. There was no equipment defect. The casing ruptured due to an overhead pour of boiling liquid. The incident wasn't a failure. It was the result of a deliberate act. I passed the timestamps next. Here is the report Pat filed with the city 6 minutes before the kettle was used. Then the flash drive. And here is the original board memo outlining the plan for a demonstration before any incident occurred. Papers rustled. Someone coughed. Pat's hands twitched, but she kept the smile glued on. I continued liability clause summary, insurer's open review, the illegal signage across 11 properties. Harlan stood slowly and passed the administrator Pat's internal email. "I confirm its authenticity," he said quietly. The silence that followed was beautiful. The administrator looked at the documents, then at the board. "This evidence will be submitted for immediate review. Until such time, Acting President Winslow is temporarily suspended from enforcement duties. Effective immediately." Pat didn't scream. She didn't slam anything. She just gathered her papers with mechanical precision, stood, and walked out without a word. Heels clicking down the hallway like the last beats of a dying empire. The neighbors started whispering. Not loud, but enough. The narrative had cracked. The fiction had met the facts, and the facts were winning. The next day the room looked different. No performance arc, just 2 straight rows like an actual courtroom. More residents showed up than I'd ever seen at any HOA meeting. They could smell blood in the water. Pat stood near the back in a bright red blouse, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Trying to look defiant. Looking small. The administrator opened with procedural affirmations, confirmation of suspension, motion for third-party oversight. Then the floor opened for community response. I approached the podium, adjusted the loose-neck mic, and placed the folder down. "This is the full analysis," I said. "Thermal imaging, pressure fracture mapping, photographic evidence." Click. Slide 1, ruptured casing with bullseye pattern. The cause wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate. Click. Slide 2, timestamp city complaint filed early. Click. Slide 3, unredacted memo. Click. Slide 4, insurer's letter. Click. Slide 5, side by side of Lila's burn and the fractured fogger. She executed a staged demonstration that injured my wife to force policy compliance that had never been approved by this board or by law. Silence. Then Harlan stood. I was asked to delete these records. I did not. I believe this board was misled. He sat. The administrator looked left, right. Whispers. A motion to strike all citations issued by Pat over the last 30 days. Seconded. Approved in under 2 minutes. Another motion to refer her for civil liability review. Passed. Pat never moved. Never spoke. Just stared at me with eyes that finally understood she'd lost the one thing she craved more than control. The illusion that she could hurt people quietly and wrap it in paperwork. Outside, the signs were already gone. The fogger arrived back from evidence 2 weeks later. Same model, coil replaced, fracture line chemically polished but still visible like a scar. Lila asked me to bring it inside. She cleaned it herself, fingers trembling but purposeful. It still works, she said. They replaced the coil. She touched the faint line and smiled. The burn on her arm had faded to a pale patch she no longer hid under sleeves. She wore it like armor now. The neighborhood felt lighter. No more daily emails. No more aggressive reminders. Where the old bulletin board once stood, a new one appeared. Community special election. Interim president nominations open. Harlan's name was on it. He came by that evening with a draft reform clause. You don't have to help, he said. I redlined 2 sentences and handed it back. You'll win. He shook his head. I'm not running to win. I'm running to stop the next Pat. That night Lila worked in the garden again. The fogger hummed softly, mist curling upward in silver ribbons. She looked peaceful, whole. Across the street, an older man I recognized from the hearing lifted a hand in silent acknowledgement. Then another from 2 doors down. No words. Just the quiet understanding that rules could finally mean fairness again. Later I opened the final email from East Point Mutual. The HOA acted outside authorized jurisdiction. Claim confirmed, restitution initiated, oversight enforced. Pat had resigned quietly that morning. The community forum exploded with speculation. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I stood on the porch watching Lila plant new lavender along the ramp. Each stem shimmered in the fogger's light. The air smelled clean, floral, alive. She turned toward me, eyes bright. It's funny, she said. All this started because she wanted control, and all she did was give it back. I smiled. Control never came from power. It came from truth. And once proven, truth doesn't ask permission to stay. If you've ever watched someone try to erase your reality and learned how to prove them wrong, if you've ever had to fight for the quiet things that make your life livable, hit subscribe. There are more stories like this one. And every single one ends the same way. With the truth finally standing where fear once lived. So tell me in the comments, was the real violation the gentle mist that helped a sick woman breathe? Or the woman who boiled it alive to feel powerful? Who was really breaking the rules here? The fogger or the Karen who thought she was above them? Drop your verdict below. I read every single one.